79 and number 81. You can see I've highlighted number 79 here, but we really need to read the instructions above those problems to figure out what we're exactly expected to do. So it says, for the following exercises, graph y equals x cubed on the given viewing window. Determine the corresponding range for each viewing window, and then show each graph. Now this is in the technology section, so they're expecting us to use either some computer software or a graphing calculator to do this. And in terms of what you're supposed to produce when you're done, you know, what you should turn in, the last thing says show each graph. So we're going to basically graph this function, make some changes to the viewing window, and then we're done. And you can either sketch the graph on your paper or you can take a screenshot of your graph from the software and submit that. So I'll go ahead and go through number 79 and then show you what we're looking for, and then you should be able to repeat that process for number 81. Okay, so let me switch screens here. The first thing I want to recommend is that you use the Desmos graphing calculator. You can get to there by going to desmos.com, or you can download the app on your device, your phone. So when you do that, if you're on your device, you'll see a keyboard that looks something like this, and we want to graph y equals x cubed. So I would simply type y equals x, and then to make it cubed, use this A with a little B button on there, and that lets you do an exponent. So I'll put a 3 in there, and you'll see up here in the left I have y equals x cubed. On your phone, that will be down underneath the graph. I'm going to remove the keyboard now. I hit it so that we can talk about this viewing window. When you first start Desmos, you get the standard viewing window, which basically goes from -10 to 10 or thereabouts on the x-axis. And depending on how tall your screen is, it looks like mine's going from -8 to 8. On your phone, it might be a slightly different window, but that's your home view. If you move this graph around, if you just drag it around, notice the home button comes back, and you can go back to the default. And when you're in the default, the home button's not there. Now we've been provided with a domain, a viewing window that they want us to use, and then we have to figure out the corresponding range that goes with that. So remember, domain is x values. So these numbers that they've given us, these numbers that they've given us, these are x values, and we have to determine the corresponding range, meaning we have to figure out what y values to use to get the graph to show up. Once we have it showing up, we can take a screenshot or draw a picture and turn it in. Okay, so how in the world do we set the viewing window? On Desmos, there's a little wrench up here in the upper right corner. If you hit the wrench, you can change the domain and the range. And so we're going to start with the x-axis because that's the one they told us to change. As you type new numbers in here, the graph is going to change because you're changing the numbers on the x-axis. We were told to do -0.1 to 0.1. So I put the -0.1 to the left of the x and the 0.1 to the right of the x. When you do that, let me just get this out of the way for a minute. Notice that we've changed the numbers on the x-axis, and in fact we zoomed in really close. And that sort of squished our graph. It flattened it out so it almost looks like it's sitting right on the x-axis. What we need to do now is determine the appropriate range for this domain so that we can see what's happening with the graph. And so an easy way to do that is just to start plugging a few points in. So I'm just going to plug in -0.1 into x cubed. In other words, I'm going to cube -0.1, and I can do that on the side here. Remember, I hit the button to get a cube, and it'll tell me the value. And if I go to the other end of my x-axis and I cube 0.1, I get another value, 0.001. So these are the two values that I'm going to use to figure out my range, and we'll see if I can see the graph. This usually works. So I simply plugged in the numbers they gave me into my function to see what the appropriate range was. And then I'll add those to this table here for the y-axis. So on the left side, that'd be negative 0.001. And on the right side, it'll be positive 0.001. And you'll see when I hit the wrench again to get this out of the way, that now I get a pretty good idea of what the graph is doing. I'm done with this, right? If I wanted to take a screenshot of this graph, I could submit it to Google Classroom, or you could simply sketch this on your paper and just make sure you include these numbers, right? Negative 0.1 to 0.1 is my viewing window, my domain, and the appropriate range is, or the associated range is negative 0.1 to 0.1. When you're doing number 81, the process is very similar, except you won't get decimal numbers. You'll get huge numbers because you're going to cube negative 100 and positive 100. But that's the idea behind those two problems. We just need to practice getting used to setting our viewing windows so we can see how the graph is behaving. If I didn't adjust the y-axis numbers, all it looked like was a straight line, and you can see that that's not the case, that it is still curving. Okay, so hopefully that'll help you wrap up those two problems. Good luck.